Welcome to your next research study. This one I'm calling the Puritan Legacy. Think about our nation's founders. Think about who founded our nation. Some of you might be thinking of these guys, the Pilgrims or the Puritans as well. Came to the New World in the early 17th century. Others of you might be thinking of these guys, those signers of the Declaration of Independence, framers of the Constitution, the revolutionaries who won their independence in the late 18th century. So, who are the founders of our nation? Well, if you thought of either one of these, you're really right. Our nation does have sort of a conflicted origin or the source of our identity. The Pilgrims and Puritans, if you recall, they came to the New World to escape religious persecution from England. They felt their faith was that the Church of England was still way too much like the Catholic Church. It hadn't distanced itself enough from those practices. They believed also that the Anglican and Catholic interpretations of God was just way too forgiving. In their logic, they said that since God was infallible, there was in no way that you could quote change his mind about an individual. This is a really gross way of understanding what Calvinism and predestination was all about. That God, when he created everybody, conceived of everybody, decided then and there that some were destined for grace and others were not, and there was no good deeds you could do to change that path. It was just your moral responsibility to walk the straight and narrow and hope, cross your fingers and hope that you were heading in the right direction. So here we have a group of highly religiously conservative individuals trying to come to the New World to kind of sow the seeds of their faith. On the other hand, 150 years later, we have the signers and framers of the Constitution, those revolutionaries. They were revolting against political tyranny. They felt that the English monarchy threatened basic human liberties and believed in a representational government that was severed from the bloodlines of nobility. They believed, of course, famously, that since all men, and I put men in a little asterisk there because not all technically, were created equal, they have a right to participate in how they are governed. So in this group, we have a very different flavor. We have actual political progressives who are, as equally considered as founders of our nation as religious conservatives. So, where did our nation come from? What are the origins of the American identity? This is a topic that we're going to be covering over the next 4 to 5 weeks, starting with examining our Puritan heritage. It's no coincidence that early religious settlements, like the Puritans and the Pilgrims, thrived, while early settlements established for profit did not thrive. I'm talking about Jamestown and Roanoke. It did not take off like Massachusetts Bay and Salem, that sort of thing. Their success, the success of these religious settlements, was largely due to their religious practices. Their religious faith guided those rigid laws, creating a society with very real deterrents toward breaking social norms. And as kind of drab as this seems, as kind of restricting of personal liberties as this is, well, restriction of personal liberties is a really good way to keep a society together. It's not a very fun society, it's not a very fair society, but it holds that society together. Also, these early religious settlers were socially exclusionist, which created a very strong us versus them mentality. They believed that they alone were ordained by God to populate this new world, that this new continent had been given to them by God, and that their society would one day stand as an example for the whole world. This combination of characteristics created a group of people who were uniquely capable of withstanding the very real dangers of the frontier. And we can see elements of these characteristics even remaining in part of our American identity today. And that's the focus of the selections I pulled for you this week. Let's look at some key vocabulary, beginning with the noun providence. Providence is a manifestation of divine care or direction, as in, it was providence that saved us from the hurricane, as in, it was some divine intervention by God or what have you, that saved us from the hurricane. Related term providential, that's the adjective form. Posterity, the noun. Succeeding or future generations collectively. So when we refer to posterity, we're talking about all future generations, as in judgment of this age must be left to posterity, must be left to future generations. I don't have a related word there. Afflict, the verb, to distress with mental or bodily pain, to trouble greatly or grievously, to be afflicted with arthritis or any other painful disease, for instance. And the nominative form of that is affliction. Doctrine, the noun, a particular principle, position, or policy taught or advocated as of a religion or of a government, as in the Catholic doctrines that explain that direct you on how to be a good Catholic, or the Monroe Doctrine. The verb form of that is to indoctrinate, to make a people follow a doctrine, basically. Presume, the verb, to take for granted, to assume or suppose, is that I presume you're tired after your drive, so it's just to suppose something. And the nominative form of that is presumption. Inevitable, the adjective, meaning unable to be avoided, evaded, or escaped. Certain, necessary, as an inevitable conclusion. And the adjective form of that is inevitability. Or excuse me, inevitability is actually a noun, I'm sorry. There we go, change that to a noun there. Lastly, Jeremiad with a capital J. It's a noun. A Jeremiad is a literary work in which the author bitterly laments the state of society and its morals in a serious tone of sustained invective, and always contains a prophecy of society's imminent downfall. The Jeremiad is named after the biblical figure Jeremiah, who authored 2 books of the Old Testament, in which he prophesies the fall of the kingdom of Judah. Here's a sample sentence for you. In his Jeremiad, the preacher cited violent video games and gangster rap as creating a more violent society, as bringing the imminent downfall of society. In your reading selections, you're going to read a couple of different Jeremiads today, and a whole piece talking about the American Jeremiad as a literary genre. The adjective form is Jeremiadic. If you were to describe a piece of literature, you could say that that piece of literature can condemn society for its lack of morals. It is Jeremiadic. Yeah. All right, your reading list. I'm going to start off with a selection from one of Sarah Vowell's books called The Wordy Shipmates. Next up, very famous speech delivered by John Winthrop called A Model of Christian Charity. Then Cotton Mather's Wonders of the Invisible World. Next, John Hale's A Modest Inquiry into the Nature of Witchcraft. Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, a very famous sermon by Jonathan Edwards. Next, a piece by Mark Stephen Jędrzyk called Modern Jeremiahs. And then finally, a selection from, it's a whole column written by Matthew Hudson in the New York Times called Still Puritan After All These Years. All right, that's it. Get reading, and don't forget your dialogue journal entries are always due the following Monday after the assignment opens.